Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this particular webinar on CRF3. We ran one of these on Wednesday, which was very successful. We had some very good feedback from people who attended, and no doubt today will be equally as successful. The only difference being it is a Friday afternoon and the sun is shining, so that may have had an influence on attendees. We're not sure. We had a great registration, but we'll have to wait and see who shows up. Nevertheless, Caroline, who is going to be taking you through this process, has helped us before when we also did some webinars on CRF2. So I think rather than blab on, I'll just say welcome everybody, welcome and hello to Caroline, and thank you Freya for organising and making it all happen. And over to you, Caroline.
Okay, smashing. Thank you very much, Peter. Well, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, there are two presenters who are supposed to be here today. There's myself, Caroline Taylor, and my colleague, Vanessa. Vanessa is held up momentarily, and at some point during this afternoon's presentation will join us. What we're going to do is we're going to run you through the background and the details of the CRF round 3. A little bit of detail on the application process because it is significantly different to rounds 1 or 2 if you applied for either or both of those rounds. And then what we've got is a chance for you to ask some questions, obviously because of the nature of the presentation, some very specific particular questions about your organisation may well be difficult for us to answer. But if you've got common thoughts, if you've got questions, put them up. If we can answer them, then we will. If they're the sort of thing that we need to get back to you on, then we'll try and get back to you at the end of the presentation, some point over the next couple of days. Okay, let's start then. The Cultural Recovery Fund. Now, this is round 3. And one of the things that you'll need to note, first of all, is this round is distinctly different to the other 2 rounds. In the other 2 rounds, in round 1 and round 2, there was just one pot of money that was available, and there was just one application process for that pot of money. This time round, because it's coming at the very end of the process when we feel that there should be support made available for cultural organisations, supplier organisations, etc., Arts Council England have split it into 2 distinct funds. And this presentation is going to deal with the fund that's open at the moment, and that is the Emergency Resource Support Fund. And that's £20 million available for organisations who make the application. The second part of the fund, and as it's detailed there, the continuity support, that's coming, and at the moment the guidance says later in the summer. Now we're already getting late in the summer, so it needs to get a move on, but we understand there's going to be £198.5 million available in that. What we think at the moment, although it's not been confirmed, we think that continuity support monies will be available for organisations that received grants in either round 1 or in round 2, or those organisations that received grants in round 1 and 2. Some organisations got money in both sets of the rounds. We also think, although it's not been confirmed, that that fund, continuity support, may well be open to new applicants. As soon as we get the details about that, then I'm sure there will be information available because it is going to be one of those funds that we know a number of organisations will be wanting to make an application to. But the presentation today is going to deal with the emergency resource support. Okay, this is really where we have to start to think. In round one of the Cultural Recovery Fund was for emergency funding for any organisation who needed some financial support. Round 2 was to help organisations transition into beginning to open and hopefully start to open and trade back at their existing pre-COVID levels. Round 3 and the emergency support round element is, as it says there, to provide exceptional emergency funding to culturally significant organisations that were financially sustainable before COVID-19, but now are at imminent risk of failure and have exhausted all other reasonable options for increasing their resilience. Let's just take that bit by bit as it stands. So it's exceptional. This is a one-off programme of monies, £20 million, and it is deemed and aimed at those organisations that are requiring exceptional intervention. This isn't necessarily for organisations that have had monies in round 1 and round 2. It's for those people who really are an exception and really do need some kind of investment. It's emergency funding. It is for those organisations that have really reached the end of the line. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's for organisations that are deemed to be culturally significant. We will explore what the term culturally significant means, because it's for those organisations that make a real impact into the cultural ecology. And for you, if many of you are supplier organisations, you're going to have to think quite hard about how you and the work that your other organisations that you work alongside are culturally significant, but we'll come to that again later in the presentation. What it's aimed at is those organisations that were financially sustainable. If before COVID-19, so if in November, December 2019, you were already starting to show signs that the business was not going to hold up, you would not be considered financially sustainable. It's for those organisations that were trading profitably and then everything stopped. Circumstances came together, the situation impacted on their ability to do the work. It may well be that festivals shut down, it may well be that live gigs stopped happening, it may well be that theatres closed to customers. So it's not people who had already got a pattern of poor financial sustainability. You won't get through the assessment process if that is you. What you also have to be is you have to be at risk of imminent failure. And when they say at risk of imminent failure, what they mean is that within 12 weeks of the point of your application, you have to demonstrate in a cash flow that you are likely to go out of business. You are likely to have no cash in the business. You're not going to be able to generate enough income to support the outgoings and the debts that you have within the business. We'll talk a little bit about debts later on, because it's not all debts are included within this, but there is some clear guidance about what you could include and what you couldn't include. And finally, not only do you have to be at risk of imminent failure, but what you have to be able to do is demonstrate in your application that you have tried and exhausted all of the reasonable options for increasing your resilience. What does that mean? It could be that you've disposed of equipment. It could be that you sold vans, you sold equipment that you have that you hire out to organisations. It could well be that you've left your premises or moved to smaller premises. It could well be that you've exhausted all reasonable options to increase your resilience by taking note of all and involving yourself in all of the government schemes that have been available. You've put staff on furlough, you've made people redundant. If you haven't done any of those things, you will be asked to explain why. Why didn't you do that? What were the reasons? And if there are good reasons, it's a really small company, there are only 3 of us, and actually we were all absolutely key critical to remain within the business whilst COVID was taking place, that would be a reason. But if you didn't, and you chose to carry on, then they will wonder whether you took all of the options that were available to you. So what you have to do, as it says there, at the point of when you make an application, you have to show that you're at the point of no longer trading viably within 12 weeks. So if you put in an application now, you would be saying at the end of the summer, early autumn, you would be starting to go into a position where your business was liable to collapse. The debts that you have, you cannot pay. You don't have resources, income to be able to meet all of those debts that you've got. So that for some people will be a reason why you won't be able to carry on. So essentially, you have to be able to demonstrate that without support from the CRF fund, your company could not generate sufficient income or sufficient cash reserves where it's appropriate to liquidate them in order to meet your operating payments and your debt requirements. So if you have large debts and you have operating requirements and you can't generate enough income to sustain yourself through that 12-month period, you could be eligible to apply. The other thing, what you have to be able to do, and again, this round is full of a number of different hurdles that you've got to be able to prove, is not only do you have to show that within 12 weeks of the point of your application that your business is potentially not going to be a viable business, but you also have to demonstrate that by the 31st of December, you return back to a position of financial viability. So it's a momentary, temporary blip that you're going through. That's what they're looking for. If that's you, a momentary, temporary blip, and you can show that in the early part of 2022, you are going to get back to a financially viable position, this is the grant stream for you. There will be, and we know there will be, some organisations that actually can demonstrate that they're going to find themselves in a position where the business is no longer financially viable within 12 weeks of making an application. But what they're going to struggle to do is show that they're viable after the 31st of December. And unfortunately, this grant stream will not be available to help those organisations. So you've got to have those two things in place, that you're at risk of going under, but you can show that with a small injection of monies that you can get yourself back to a position of viability. As it says there, you've got to show that during 22-23, the calendar year 22 or the financial year 22-23, you can continue without further emergency support. One of the reasons for this is that they want to make investments in those businesses that can survive. Another reason is that we do not think that there will be any more investment coming from central government to support the cultural sector. The 1.57 billion that has been ploughed into the sector so far is really, the signal is that is the end of the line. So that's where you have to find yourself, and you have to be in a position where you can survive and grow and get back to where you were, but you only require this short-term little injection of funding. Okay, if I do this last slide and then I'll hand you over to Vanessa, who's just joined us. This time round, the minimum grant that you can put in for is £25,000, and the maximum grant is up to £1 million for for-profit companies. If you're a not-for-profit company, you can apply for up to 1.5 million. Now, those are big numbers. Bear in mind, the total pot available for the grant scheme is 20 million. So 20 companies, large-scale companies coming in at that top end figure, that pot will be exhausted. It is highly unlikely that very many companies will get grants in the region of £1 million. It really isn't. The money isn't there to support that. The other thing to bear in mind is if you have been successful in rounds 1 or 2 and you've previously had money, you can only receive over all 3 rounds a maximum of 1.5 million if you are a for-profit company. So if you did have money in round 1 or round 2, you must factor that into your calculations. And just to reiterate, it's to cover the losses between your income and your operating costs, where you can show a return to financial viability. It's not for other things. It's not for future things that you might want to do. It's not for things that you'd like to do. It's to cover those losses. And that's very clear about where the money is being targeted and aimed at. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa now, who'll take you through the next set of slides.
Okay, so this is, hello everybody, sorry I'm a little late, but just to go through the process, this is quite a different application process to what we've seen before, which was a deadline and you met the deadline with full application. On this one, you have to first of all apply for permission to apply. So that is one form that you fill in. There are 2 or 3 questions in it that require a word count of up to 400, as well as substantial financial information. They will make a decision within 5 working days as to whether you are then being invited to apply. If you're invited to apply, you have literally 5 more days in which you can put in your full application. And then they will take up to 6 weeks to give you a decision. So it's unlike previously where there was, I can't remember, I think it was the 26th of January deadline noon. That is not the case in this particular round. It is a rolling program of applying. So obviously you could go for permission to apply and they might say no. Because it's a rolling program, you can actually make a permission to apply application by the 30th of September 2021. And after that, no more inquiries will be taken. But that means that by the, and I'm trying to work this out in my head, by the 5th of October, they will have told you whether you can apply or not. The fund itself, the full application, will actually close on the 14th of October. So there is time for you to look carefully at whether this is the right fund for you and get all of that financial information that will be required and your questions ready. The eligibility is similar to the last time. It's limited companies, those with shares and limited by guarantee. There's single directorships. They are prepared to look at subsidiary companies of wider companies, but a single application must be made by the parent company to cover all the eligible organizations, so that you didn't have, let's say, 5 subsidiaries of one organization, but one parent company is saying these are the subsidiaries that are at risk of closure within that 12-week period. You can also have limited partnership going for this as well. But whatever you are must have been constituted by the 31st of March 2019. Now, sole traders are not eligible, but freelancers who operate within a limited company would be eligible. So again, it's not for individuals, but if you work under a freelance contract within a limited company, then that company would be eligible.
Just one thing to say, because we might have some not-for-profit organisations who have joined the webinar this afternoon, that not-for-profit registered charities, community interest companies, accredited museums are also eligible to apply for this round of funding. We've put this together because it was targeted at members of PLASA, so they are likely to be professional companies and private companies rather than or for-profit companies rather than not-for-profit, but not-for-profit can also apply.
So what will the grant cover? And I think you need to be very clear about this. And as Caroline had said, it's very much about covering the operational costs. So it's staff salaries and fixed or operational costs, such as rent or any lease deals that you have or anything that is a fixed operational cost. The cost for projects or activity that is essential to your continued operation and that would be related to the reopening of businesses in a COVID-safe manner and that will drive future income. Now, one of the areas that we've discussed is this thing that's called COVID-safe, because actually some of the things that were highlighted as being the prompts, such as social distancing, sanitation, etc., may not be in place by the time this fund closes. In England, of course, as of Monday, many of those will finish. You can look at full or partial repayment or clearance of COVID-related debt incurred since the 1st of April 2020, but not any affordable lending. So if you incurred debt because of COVID, you can apply for that. If it was already loans or bank overdrafts that you had prior to that, you cannot apply to repay for any of that. It will look again at rebuilding reserves up to 8 weeks of your turnover. You could look at whether there are any additional risk management reviews, financial reviews, business planning or governance options that you need in that period or you would have been doing in that period. And again, this is one that I think may need certain clarity. You can have a one-off cost, a capital cost of up to 10% for equipment adaptations related to social distancing, home working, CRM systems, digital to help you interact with your customers. But as many of those things, such as home working and need to work from home, may change, certainly, and many will change as of Monday, I think you just need to be clear what that is and why it's necessary in your case. The ineligible costs are also quite clear. They can't be operating costs outside of this period that takes you up to the 31st of December. It can't be for a new idea. I think Caroline touched on that earlier to say it's not about new work or projects or activity. It cannot be used to clear historical debt unless that debt is unavoidable and will seriously impact on future viability. It can't repay back any of the government costs such as civils or the bounce back loans. And it can't cover any of the costs that would be covered by business interruption insurance. If you've had any outstanding tax bills or VAT that's reclaimable, that can't be included. And any costs that are eligible by any other strand of government support. So this will not be money that you can get that pays off other money or contributes to other money you've had through a government grant.
So one of the questions that we had following Wednesday's presentation was from an organisation that had had their CRF monies in round 2. And because of the delays that they'd had in actually receiving their CRF grant, some organisations only received their grant in the middle of June when the grant period ended at the end of June 2021. And so what they were given permission to do was to extend that grant until the 31st of December 2021. So if you were one of those organisations that you've been given permission to extend or spend your CRF monies from either round 1 or round 2 outside of the period, and you've got that at the moment in time, and for example, if you've used it to cover your staffing costs, you can't then include staffing costs or that element of staffing costs in this CRF round 3 application, because it will be seen as double counting. So you really need to be clear about what you've had. And if you have had anything that extends over this period from elsewhere, you really need to be clear about what you're asking for Arts Council to fund, and make sure that you can demonstrate that you haven't got money from elsewhere to cover that on there. So that's one of the things that we know some organisations may well find themselves being hit by. Okay, the portal, the process. Some organisations have already registered and got themselves an application website on the Arts Council website, Grantium. If you haven't registered on the website Grantium and you are thinking that this application strand or the other one, the continuity support, might be something that you or your company might wish to go for, we would advise that you set yourself up a profile, a company profile or an organisational profile on Grantium. That's asking you for information about the company, about the business, about those people who are involved. It's fairly standard information, contact details, which field of work that you operate in, which field of the cultural sector you operate in. What that will do is when you've submitted that form, Arts Council verify it and check out with all the various bodies that you are a bona fide organisation, and they validate your profile. If you haven't got a profile, you won't be able to apply for permission to apply, or you won't be able to then make your full application. So although there is a rolling programme, there isn't a deadline, we would still advise that if you're thinking about it, you might want to do that first step. The other thing is, for those people who are unfamiliar with Grantium, it will give you an insight into Grantium because it isn't the most user-friendly of portals. It's not the most user-friendly online system ever in the world. So you might want to just understand how it works by setting yourself up your company profile. As Vanessa has said, the first stage, you complete the permission to apply form, which we'll look at in a moment in time. And there's 2 responses to that. One is you'll be invited to make the application, and that is within the 5 days. So then everything has to be uploaded within 5 days, or you will be rejected. What we don't know at the moment is that if you apply for this grant stream, the emergency support grant stream, and you're rejected from that, whether you can then go ahead and apply for the continuity scheme, which is due out later. So you will have to make a decision. If you feel you might fit this criteria, then you might want to think about whether you go for this grant fund or the continuity. If this is the grant fund for you, if you are absolutely on your uppers, you're at the end of the road and you can meet all those criteria with regards to timing, then this is the one to go for. Because as I say, what we don't know is if you apply for this grant stream and get rejected, whether you can then go in and make an application for the other stream.
And I think we should say that that would also apply possibly if you even went as far as the full application and still got rejected. So we're keeping a very close watching eye on what they're saying about the next sum of money, which is substantially more than this one, which is 20 million.
So the permission to apply form, they ask you some questions first of all, and those are yes, no answers. So they ask you about your organisation. So for example, are you a not-for-profit organisation or are you a for-profit? They ask you to look at which sector you work within of the cultural sector. Is it in theatre? Is it in music? Is it in dance, etc.? So you're asked to fill in, and those are yes, no's. Then they ask you some questions, and these are the ones that you really need to think about. And what you might want to do is get a Word document and actually play around with them from there. You have 400 words, 400 characters, rather. Words you have character spaces for about 400 words to fill this in, and they ask you for quite a lot of information. So don't write sentences, just literally bullet point the information down, and don't even put a bullet point in, because bullet point space and then start a word, you've already used some of your characters. Just make it so you can clearly understand what you're putting down. They ask you to describe any schemes or income sources that you've utilised. And what they want to know is what's happened to you over the period whilst COVID has been going on. As it says there, have you had any government loans? Have you had any rate relief? Some companies were lucky enough to get rate relief, others weren't. They sat above the level from there. Did you receive any of the additional restriction grants? Local authorities issued them at different times, and some people managed to get everything automatically. Other people had to apply for them and didn't realise that there were some very short time windows on some of those grants that were available. Did you access furlough? If you do, so if you had ARG, just put ARG and then the amount of money. Furlough, how many staff you furloughed and what the amount of money was. If you were lucky enough to make any income during the time, so if you managed to keep going or you open for very short periods of time, then put that in from there. But again, as little detail as you can, as fewer words rather as possible, but gives them the information that they need, put that in. It also, as I said before, what it wants to know is what did you use or consider to keep the company going? We had experience last time round of people who had sold their premises. So they'd sold their premises and they'd used the capital that they'd made to keep the company going. Other organisations had used company reserves. Some people in companies, all the directors took a pay freeze or a pay cut, didn't receive anything. Most directors were operating in that position from there. Did you take out any lending other than either the CBIL or the bounce back loan? Did you approach your bank for any lending? Did you go to the community? So some of the music venues approached their community and went through crowdfunding. If you did, you need to detail that from there. And for 400 words, that's not an awful lot of word count to actually describe what has gone on. If you didn't go for anything, so for example, if you didn't apply for CRF rounds 1 or rounds 2, why didn't you apply? It could well be you didn't know about it. It could well be that you were told you thought you were ineligible or told you were ineligible, because in the initial rounds of round 1 and also partway through round 2, some commercial organisations were told that they weren't eligible to go forward, to then find out later that they could. So give them information, because if there is a question that they have about a grant scheme or an avenue of support that you haven't detailed in your application, they will query it, and it will be part and parcel of the reason why you get turned down. So for example, in grant round 2, we had an organisation that didn't say that they went forward for business rates relief. They were eligible for it, but they didn't realise that they were eligible for it from there. And they got failed, as one of the reasons in the feedback was because that they hadn't explained whether or not they'd had business rates relief. So it is going to be as pernickety and as picky as that. So you really need to think about what you're putting down. The second question, they ask you about your organisation and its work. Again, 400 words. We'll come back to cultural significance and cultural activities that you support in a moment in time. What they want to know is what activity you plan to deliver in the time frame, and bear in mind this is going to be for most organisations a relatively short time frame. So if you've got your application in by the end of July, you are talking August, September, October, November, December. For lots of organisations, it may only be that you've got 2 or 3 months that you're detailing. Don't be ambitious. Don't be over ambitious. Tell them what you're going to do during the time. As part of the application process, if you get through, you have to fill in a timeline of tasks, and you have to say things like contact furlough staff, invite them back in, familiarisation day, first day back in the office, second week back in the office, whatever it is that you're going to do, you've got to detail what you're going to do with them. So don't do new stuff. It's about keeping your business going. You've got to talk there about the current state of the organisation. So if you started with a staff team of 100 and you've laid off 50 people and you've got 25 on furlough, you've got 3 people who were retained, but the rest of them were made redundant, detail that in your application. Again, just put the figure and then what you did, figure and what you did from there, because you've got to give them a picture of how that business is looking at this moment in time. The other bit that they're asking for is, what are your conclusions about what consumers, visitors, attendees are going to be doing over the next few months? If you're in theatre, what do you think is going to happen? Are you going to open to full packed houses every night? Highly unlikely. Are you actually going to be able to open every night? Are you going to be coming back with a gradual programme building up to your pantomime in December? When it gets to pantomime in December, what sort of percentage are you imagining are going to come in terms of attendance figures? Are you going to be at 50%, 75%? They need to know what your thinking is, because what you've got to demonstrate to them is you are understanding how your business might be impacted by the next few months as we move forward and we move out of COVID. So clearly think about what you're going to say before you put it in. I'm going to go on to the third question, and then we're going to come back to cultural significance. They want to know here about your current position, and that's your current financial position. What do you think is going to happen to you, and how have you got to this position that you are saying you are going to be no longer trading viably? Where are the gaps? So if you're looking at your income, what's happened to your income? What do you think is going to continue to happen to your income? Is it going to remain at the constant level that it is at the moment in time? Are a couple of the mainstays of your calendar of events things that might be affected by? So again, use the example of the theatre company. What you've got there is you've traditionally done very well at Christmas time in terms of pantos, but you're just not sure what's going to happen at this point in time. So you're really predicting numbers way under where you would be. If you're an events management company, what we think is that you might say, well, you know, September feels fairly buoyant. We've got a couple of events in the diary, but actually when we get up to Christmas time, we don't know what's going to happen, because we don't know how the weather is going to impact on what we do. We think we're going to be running something, but we're not necessarily going to be running as many events as we did last year. Partly it depends on our partner organisations. Are they going to survive? So you've got to detail your thoughts about what your current and your future position is in terms of your financial position. And what you're also being asked to do is explain how you would use the grant to achieve your financial viability. Clearly here, what they're looking for you to be is really conservative and really think about the money you're going to be asking them to give you. It's public money. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to be watching and holding the public purse. It's taxpayers' money. So if you go in and ask for on day one for everybody to come back in the business, for everything to suddenly start to ramp up, that by 31st of December, you're flying out the door as you were before, you are probably not going to be thinking about financial viability. That's not what's going to happen. You know it's not what's going to happen. I know you're not going to put that, but they want you to think it through. The bit that they do need some detail on here is how you've managed financial risk. They want to know, for example, did you reforecast all your budgets? How many shareholder meetings or board meetings did you have? How many senior management team meetings did you have? Did you consider it on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis? If you considered it once throughout the period in time, you've not shown yourself to be managing financial risk. If you were every week, you were having finance meetings, you were thinking about where it is, that shows you were as an organisation on top of where you were. Second point is if you've received a cultural recovery grant in round 1 or round 2, they want to know how you spent it. Round 1 was emergency funding. So for many organisations, that was relatively simple. Round 2 was about a plan to get you back to operational strength. And we all know that almost as soon as applicants put in for their round 2 funding, the situation changed. So many of the festival providers forecast that they were going to get back to operating, the festivals were going to come back and run. As soon as they applied, the application process closed and festivals already started to fall. What they then want to know is what you did with the money and how you then spent it, because they want to check that they, having given you once the first lot of money, they've given you and you've spent it wisely. It's public money, taxpayers' money. They want to keep the check on it from there. The other thing they're wanting to say is if you have had round 1 and round 2 funding in particular, and you're coming back in for round 3, what happened? What was the things that you didn't realise were going to happen that have now created a situation where you are almost going to go bust? That's a big question that you're going to have to answer. What decisions did you take? What things did you make mistakes around? And those mistakes won't necessarily be yours. They will be things that we all thought were going to happen. Were there things that you spent money on that actually now you realise you would not have spent that money on had you known about? You've got to detail that. And again, this is all within 400 words. So you've got to really clearly explain why you are asking for the money, what you'll do with it, how you'll manage it and look after it safely. And at the same time, show them that you're not going to be able to be viable without this short-term injection of funding. Somebody asked in the questions, is this a grant or is this repayable finance? It is a grant. It is a grant that will be given to you. And once they've agreed the amount with you of what they're going to give you, once they've done all their calculations and figures, that is what they're going to give you. They're not going to ask for it back. So they need to be reassured that you're going to use it well. When it comes to the finance section, one of the things is that you are able to ask for reserves, a contribution to reserves. Bear in mind that contribution to reserves cannot exceed 8 weeks worth of your turnover in a year. Don't go in and ask for a huge chunk of money to come back and refloat the company. This isn't what this grant stream is for, but you can ask for it, but be mindful of the amount of money that is available and the time it's going to take for people to assess this application and think about how they will receive your information. What conclusions will they draw about the level of your ask? Okay, cultural significance.
Okay, just in a way to think about cultural significance is also linked to that question about consumer behaviour. And what is quite difficult for the supply chain is that often you are not the direct deliverer of that work. So if you were applied for round 1 and round 2 or either of those rounds, and you were rejected on that question, so you got a not met on that question, they will be looking at those previous applications, and therefore you need to give them any new information that will make them assess it again. So when you look at applying and you were turned down on that question, please go back to it and look at what the reason might have been that you were given for that. The cultural significance for the supplier chain has been one where you have to look really carefully at where whatever you supply or deliver meets their genres or their subgenres. And on their webpage, there is a substantial list of what they mean by that. So recently, and in the previous round, we were asked a lot about music and music suppliers. If you look at that, you will see that now there is a really long subgenre. So if what your work is predominantly with hip hop or punk or certain rap, for instance, before you would have thought, oh, that makes me ineligible, it's now seen as one of the subgenres. But again, if you had that in your first application and they turned it down, they will look at that and they will need to see a significant shift in order for them to reassess that. Cultural significance is about how you supply. It's not, and they're clear now, it is about create, present, or support. And most of the supply chain will be about supporting that cultural significance. So it will be the delivery that you do, whether it's rigging, sound, light, digital, that enhances, and they could not do that delivery without you, that will be the area that you need to emphasize. So I think that it's important when you're looking at that particular question to think around who your consumer is, who your clients are, and what it is they deliver. If you do it direct and you have audiences, there is quite a lot of information now under the audience agency, which has looked at the return of audiences. And it would be well to have a look at some of their more recent reports on what they're seeing in terms of audience return. If, however, you're backstage, behind the scenes, you may also want to look at what the audience is that your client supplies to, what the delivery of their work is. Sorry, Caroline.
Alongside the information that you'll need to put in, you will need to supply a cash flow forecast that we've said before that demonstrates that you're going to go under. For the full application, and this is some advance warning, if you put in your permission to apply and you then get a full application permission to go forward, you also need to put in some further detailed financial information. And this was one of the things last time round, which applicants took some time to get together, because it is quite a comprehensive list of things that they're asking you for. Okay, on the Arts Council website, there is a detailed budget template, and they want you to use that for the 12 months. They want you to drop your information into their budget template. You can change the titles of some of the headings that they've used on there, but you can't add to the template. The reason they want you to use the template is they want to be able to look at like for like. So everybody uses the same template. They can find the information that they need quickly. They can understand it. Your figures will be your figures. They won't necessarily reference anybody else. 2 balance sheets that you've got to provide. One is at the point of application, showing your actual levels of restricted and unrestricted reserves. That's really Arts Council speak. What that's about is cash in the business. So do you have cash in the business that you might hold on account? Is it held for a specific purpose? So for example, are you in the middle of buying a fleet of vehicles, and what you've done is you've put that money aside to pay back over the loan period from there? So you can't touch that. If you touch that money, you won't be able to meet your loan requirements from there. So have you got monies that you're holding that you can't spend, that you would consider to be, in Arts Council speak, that is considered restricted. It's designated for a specific purpose. Somebody has said, this is what we're going to use this pot of money for. If you've got free monies that you're sitting there, and it might be in savings accounts that you're actually sitting on, but you could use it if you wanted to, you've got to show that on your balance sheet. And then you've got to say, put together a balance sheet which shows when you return to financial viability. So what they want to know is, after you've had this injection of money, you are then going to find yourself back in this position where you're going back to financial viability, and your balance sheet has to show that. You've got to show 2 years of full financial statements, so company accounts at the same time. So it's wise to think, if you're going for it, if you're going to make your permission to apply, and if you've only got 5 days to complete the big full application form, that's quite a lot of information to get together. So we would advise that you get all of your financial information together, and your permission to apply form and your full application form before you go anywhere near it, because otherwise you might find you run out of time. Okay, the application form, you'll only get this given this if you are given permission to apply. It's going to go through the same sorts of questions. It will take you through overview of the organisation and the work. That's little summary. The amount you're requesting, some financial information, whether you've had a previous CRF grant before, and your current and predicted reserves position. What monies are you holding within the business? Information about your workforce. That's numerical information. How many people are employed? How many people are fully employed, part-time or part-time equivalent freelancers? The questions on the application form mirror in many ways the questions that you've already answered on the permission to apply. They are slightly longer, that's the only difference. So this time round, if you get through to the application stage, you have 700 words, not 400 words. Use the same 400 words and build on it. If there's any more information that you have to add in, put it in here. But we would always say, the 400 words that go forward in the permission to apply are the most important. The extra 300 words are some further information. Don't hang back on anything critical. Don't hold it for the application form, because you may not get there. So they're going to ask you about how it's impacted on your financial viability, resilience and sustainability. Again, building up what happened to you over that period of time and what did you do. They're going to ask you what this grant will enable you to do. And that's your moment to talk a little bit more about what your plans are. You can, in that point, you might want to be able to expand a little bit on your plans, but nothing critical. If it's critical, get it in the permission to apply. For new applications, bear this in mind. You will be asked to answer 3 key questions. Those questions there that relate to your financial viability. You'll also be asked to ask questions on cultural significance and opening up access diversity, which we will come to in a minute. If you had a CRF grant in round 1 or round 2, you won't be asked to fill in that question on cultural significance or the question on opening up access and diversity, because you've already done that. So they're taking that as read, but if you're a new person, you will. Okay, cultural significance. Again, this is on the main application form.
So again, it's about looking at details of the work that your organisation does and how that fits the criteria of culturally significant. So these are the questions they ask, the prompts that they give you to detail your organisation's work. Now, again, we are only talking about up to what they see as a certain number of characters of approximately 700 words. And to have got to this stage, you will have already done the first 400. So it's detailing specifically the work that you do that would fit what they acknowledge is cultural significance. How is it culturally significant is your work? So if it's working with theatres, with dance companies, community, any participatory work that you do, where is the cultural significance of that work? And does it provide cultural opportunity in England? So where the work that you're doing is perhaps also about where in your workforce you're developing skills or employability within the sector that is specifically targeted at those genres and subgenres that they've listed. Again, just to reiterate, if you applied and were rejected for rounds 1 and 2 or rounds 1 or 2, and your information that was in that application will be looked at and will be used in this assessment. So unless you're giving them any new information that was provided in the PTA and that you can add to in this question, they will assume there has been little or no change, and therefore that you still would not meet that criteria. So it's quite important to think carefully about what is the work that you do, what is your client base, who do they deliver to, and how would they perhaps be seen as culturally significant, and without you would not be able to do that work. Or if there was less of you, i.e. the market, the supply chain radically reduced, that actually it would be unaffordable, or it would not be sustainable for those art forms, that cultural significance, to be delivered in the way that it is.
This question presents a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties for organisations. The way to think of it is in kind of two chunks. Is this issue of culturally significant. So are you, as a supplier, serving some of those huge, big, key brands in the cultural sector that bring people to and are recognised as part of the cultural offer of England? So are you working with some of the leading cultural organisations? Are you lighting events that take place at some of the leading cultural arts institutions? Are you working in terms of theatre with some of the leading theatres? It doesn't have to be a national theatre, it could be a regionally significant theatre from there. Are you in an environment where your work, your events management company, is working at some of the leading stately homes or some of the leading external outside venues within the UK? Those ones that we would probably all say that is, we'd recognise from a photograph of it. So if you're providing, for example, cultural events that take place every year at Stonehenge, that most people in the UK, have shown a picture of Stonehenge, would probably have seen it somewhere before. So they'd be able to say, yeah, I've seen that. It is a known site. It's something there. If you're providing culturally significant opportunities, work, services to organisations that deliver at venues like that, places like the National Portrait Gallery, it could be places like regionally significant like Birmingham Museums Trust, it could be some of the theatres like the major regional theatres from there, some of those cutting edge theatres that are doing leading work with new organisations, bringing new playwrights to the screen, to the stage, then those are the kind of organisations. They are, to go back to that terrible phrase that Oliver Dowden used at the very start of this, they are the cultural jewels in the crown. If you're working with those, if you're working with organisations that are winning awards all the time for the quality of the work that they do, then you need to be detailing that in your application. If at the other end of the scale, you're working with the local council in your area, you provide events management to the local council in your area, and your local council provides a programme of cultural activity, and your local area is an area which is highly one of deprivation, that you can show that there are statistics that say a certain percentage of the population are living on really low incomes, there's low levels of employment, there's high levels of ill health, poverty, then those are the kind of things, by you being able to provide, whether it's the lighting, the sound, the staging, you are providing access to people to go out and have a good time, to be involved in culture. So if you're involved in something like you've been involved in any of the City of Culture programmes, talk about that. If you've been involved in something like the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games that's coming up, talk about things like that. If you're involved in the Festival 2022 next year, talk about things like that, because that shows that that's the level of work that your supplier chain is involved in. Are you a cutting edge video producer? Are you using new creative technology, digital technology that the not-for-profit sector in a year's time, in 3 years' time will use, because you've done that before with something, you've introduced something new to the market that has revolutionised the way that audiences have seen and have engaged with culture and activity in the arts sector? Those are the kind of things you need to be talking about. That's what they're looking for. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's only the great big organisations. Some people said, oh, well, we'll never get anywhere because we are a lighting company that supplies. It's really thinking about who you supply to and where are they within the cultural framework. It's not necessarily that it's your lighting. Your lighting provides the atmosphere, the ambience, the light creates the atmosphere where audiences can enjoy themselves. So you've really got to think about it. And I know it's going to be, for some organisations, this isn't your normal way of thinking, and it's going to be a real challenge. Diversity.
Okay, one of the things they asked for before, and they're again asking for, is asking how you will open up access by improving the diversity of viewer. And they list the areas they're looking at: audiences, visitors, participants, workforce, and governance. So the two areas, and you can see we've highlighted the one which is probably most relevant to this particular group of organizations, is where in your organization you have diversity within your workforce. What is your recruitment policy? Are you doing any work with colleges or with employment of people from the community in which you are based, and spreading and widening the diversity of your workforce? That includes in some areas where there may be a very low percentage of women who work in that particular area that you're in. Are you doing any specific training or recruitment around that? The other one is around governance, and again, stating who your directors are, even if it's only a couple on your company, again, is about where that diversity within the company may lie, or whether you're considering inviting other directors or working with other people who will be involved in the governance of the organization. This is one that is very clear. If you have a diversity, equal opportunities, recruitment policy, then this is where you could refer to those. And I think we need to check. I can't remember whether you can upload additional documents. You can't. So there's no additional documents. So it's important that here you refer to those policies in terms of how you are clear in the diversity of the work that you do. If you work with organizations, so for instance, if you specifically do some work with, let's say, a Diwali festival, that you actually show that some of the work you do is for those communities and how you work with the deliverers of those festivals or events in those communities.
Decisions. The final bit is they're going to make their decisions. And one of the questions that we were asked was, if you applied in round 2, but you failed in round 3, what's the likelihood of getting you a grant in this round here? The decisions are going to be made. What they're looking to do is they're looking to spread it across the whole of England. What they want to do is they don't want to give all the money out in the southeast or in the London area. They want to make sure that northwest organisations, southwest organisations also get their spread. So when the results come out, you'll see that they are going to be spread across the various areas. They're going to be spread as well across the range of art forms and disciplines. They don't want all the money to go into theatre. They don't want all the money to go into museums. They want it to be spread across those organisations from there. Size and type of organisations. So we expect, as last time round, in the last 2 rounds, there were some very big organisations that had were recipients of the funding. Likewise, there are also some very small organisations that got the money from there. They want to make sure that they've approached and awarded grants to a range of different organisations. So it could well be that some of the communities that they're looking to target, so it could be that it's around some of the specific communities. So some of the Black communities, they might choose to put in some of the money into that, because what they want to make sure is that everybody is getting access to arts and culture. And this question of cultural significance, they are going to be looking at and picking out those organisations. And I suppose the parallel we used the other day was, if there's a ripple in the pond, if you were to disappear, if your company was to go under, are there 25, 35, 45 companies doing what you're doing? You might find it very difficult to show that you are culturally significant and that your loss is actually going to make a great impact on the cultural landscape. Obviously, we know it's going to make a loss to all of you and your workforce, but this is about the cultural landscape. Are you going to shut down access because you've got a groundbreaking scheme to train young Asian men and women in terms of the rigging? Because in the rigging industry, there are very few young Asian people coming into the industry. Are you a music venue? And what you're particularly doing is promoting young women to come into the industry at all sorts of levels. And if you were to go, those schemes would stop, and there isn't anybody else that you're aware of in your local area, in your region, that's doing that. So those are the kind of things they're going to use to make the decisions. As we say, is they're going to make a decision. They say within 6 weeks. They're giving themselves a bit of lee room on this one, because last time round, some in particular of the for-profit companies, they had to do further investigation work before they could actually determine those grants from there. So they're saying that it will be 6 weeks, but it might take slightly longer. But that's how they're going to make those decisions. Like last time round, there is no right of reply. You will get a yes or a no at the permission to apply stage. If you're told no, you're told no. There isn't any way you can appeal against that. When you go through to this particular stage, the application stage, again, you will be told yes or no. So it really is, you will just have to put down your case on the strength of the information that you supply. We're available. We are doing some work with organisations. We've got consultations that we can help you, an hour and a half, up to an hour and a half to spend going through and looking at your particular situation. If there's any particular questions that you've got, or if you want to explore any of the areas that you're feeling really unclear about. And we have had some companies that have come in and asked for that help from there. We are we're offering the opportunity to complete the permission to apply and applications for people, and there is a fee of £1,500 plus VAT for doing that. If you choose to do your own permission to apply an application before you submit it, we are happy to review that for you and look over it. We will look over the application form and your permission to apply form. We won't be commenting specifically on your financial aspects. That's where you need to be working closely with your finance team, with your accountant, with those people who know what's going on within your business. We are not trained accountants, and we're not going to be telling you what there is. What we'll be doing is we'll be sense checking it. So if you're putting in your funding bid, you're asking for amounts of money that we think would be questionable, we'll ask you where those have come from. How have you got to those figures? And again, if you're putting figures in, remember you've got to be able to justify if you're charging and you're asking for well above the market rate, and the market rate for the not-for-profit sector is significantly lower than the for-profit sector in many respects. So think about it. If there's something that there is a red flag, note it down in your financial information or on your form, so you don't get that question, hang on, how come they're asking for this amount of money? But if you ask us to review your application, we'll flag those things with you before you go forward. That's the end of the presentation. There are a couple of questions I'm sure that have come in, and there may well be other things that people want. So we'll hand over and ask people to come forward with questions.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Vanessa and Caroline. I think I had a look at the Q&A. I think you're all up to date on the Q&A, the Q&A box. Lee.
There's another one come. Is there a best time to apply? i.e., will funds be spread equally across each month until September? Oh, there's a good one, Caroline. Do we have a crystal ball?
Yeah.
I mean, they're calling it a rolling program. So all we can assume with that 20 million is that, and as they're giving this 6-week assessment period, that those have been invited, that they're spreading it, not necessarily, I don't think from my experience of the project funding that it would be the same amount every month, but that they will not be giving it all out right at the beginning. But that's a question that would be very difficult to answer, because we don't know what kind and what number of applications they'll get. And as they opened PTA on the 8th of July, there may well already have been people who have been signposted to this fund and that have already made applications? I think it's a very good question, but really not one that I think even they would be prepared to give any definitive answer to.
Okay, and there's one more which is coming on the chat, which is from Matt Gord, which says, I was turned down on round 2. How do I find out what part of the app I was unsuccessful on? I don't think you can you?
No.
You can, well, you should have had a letter which said, unfortunately, you've not been successful, and then listed where you had been unsuccessful. Now, for our understanding, I think I'm right, Caroline, is some people got that. Some people got copies of their assessment. Some people got the full report as to what was and wasn't. I don't even know that it was regionally that certain regions did it a certain way. I think if you did get turned down and one of them might have been that cultural significant, it might be worth contacting them on their email system and just saying, can you have a copy? But check your letter that said why you had not been accepted on that round, and make sure there isn't anything in there that refers to the particular, they normally say which reasons you didn't get the money.
Yeah.
The ones that I've come across that have spoken to me have been using those 2 words, which is culturally insignificant, which has been difficult to swallow for a lot of people because you know, they're 95% of their work is supplying product or services to the culture. So anyway,
I think one of the things, and we found this last time round, is that the money that was targeted in rounds 1 and rounds 2, Arts Council England very clearly decided to take the priority of those organisations that were outward facing producers of cultural activity. And I think what it did was it really showed to them in many ways how little they understand what goes on within the backstage areas, within those producers, those suppliers who actually create those. You can't have a fabulous festival without all of those organisations that present and make that happen. It's the logistics team, it's the rigging team, it's the staging team. And it is a real difficulty because even for those organisations, they were putting forward cases as to why they were culturally significant. The organisations that they worked and supported are some of the leading players within the cultural sector, and Arts Council still found it very difficult to understand the role of the supplier sector. And I know, PLASA, you've been doing a whole heap of work on this, and the We Make Events group have been doing a whole heap of work on why it is important. And I think the only thing we can say is you have a very limited amount of words, and you've got to do the very best you can. Last time round, in both rounds 1 and 2, there were supplier organisations that did get funding, and what seems to have happened is that some organisations got it and their direct competitor were then turned down. So we had organisations who said, I got a no, yet my direct competitor got £750,000. The way it's being assessed is that it's going into the local office. So if you're applying in the Northwest, it will go into the Northwest office, and those grant officers are looking at them. Some of the grant officers will clearly understand the whole of the cultural ecology. Some of them won't, and some of them will have real gaps in knowledge about what you do. So what you've got to do is almost when you write the application, is give it to somebody outside of your business and say, does this make sense to you? Am I really telling myself? Am I showing how important we are to what goes on? And if you are about the bit that glues the event together, if you are the bit that happens, so this event could not happen. So for example, Glastonbury could not go on without us providing the staging, the lighting, the sound, the crew that actually gets this there, then that's the role that you play. In some instances, you might have to try and spell it out. But we have to say, we don't think everybody is going to get the money. We know that there will be some really disappointed people, as there were last time round. If you are turned down, you stand as good a chance as anybody else if you can provide the case, write the best case that you can. And that's all we can advise that you do.
Sorry, Peter. Just to add to that, they do also say that some applications will be referred to what they call the Cultural Recovery Panel.
Yes.
And that is much wider than the Arts Council. Now, what we don't know is that whether that is at a level. So for instance, if there's somebody comes in asking for that million, but they certainly are, and those do have representatives. They do tend, I have to be honest, to be from the funded sector, but they do have outside representation. And I think that will be, if there is a question around the number of suppliers or questions the Arts Council can't answer.
Okay, a couple more questions in here. I'm not sure if they've been answered or tried to be answered. One was, we're a UK limited company with international parental ownership. If we are getting financial parent company, does this limit our opportunity to receive a grant? We were successful in rounds 1 and unsuccessful in rounds 1 and 2. I've heard this from many foreign-owned businesses. Where they have got what they believe is a very, very strong case in the UK, whether or not their parent company has been supporting them directly, but this foreign ownership does seem to impact. And certainly I have my own personal evidence of this, because we own a business in the United States who are applying for their own support, and because our business in the United States is owned by us, PLASA, here in the UK, they didn't get the funding.
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge, is that in many ways what they're doing is they're trying to push it up the tree, is that actually the parent company, they are looking, Arts Council England, and don't forget that the money has come from central government and has been tightly bound about what it can be used to support. And I think there is a concern that central government funding will be used to support organisations that parent companies sitting outside the UK are in a very profitable position and should have stepped in. And so what they're doing is they're being very clear about that first and foremost, that responsibility to help save the company goes up the chain. So it's this question about, what did you do to ensure that you were viable and you were going to continue as a business? So one of the key things that they're expecting people to say is, we went to our parent company and we asked them, and if your parent company have helped you out, then that's where they expect it to remain. If your parent company didn't, they would expect you to be able to give a reason as to why not, and they will judge it. But that is ultimately going to be quite a political decision, and with a small p in how they decide whether parent companies should have stepped in or not from there. That's something we can't influence from there. It's one of the guidelines that they've been given, and it is, I think it's all part of this drive that they've got to try and make sure that somebody doesn't come back. And there was a big expose in the papers saying, you know, taxpayers' money was used to fund some of the giants of the cultural industry, where they have all the resources and should have saved their organisations. We can't help you on that one. You've got to go first to your parent company and ask them.
Can I just respond, Peter, to the one that's come in on the chat about freelancers? Just to make it absolutely clear, we are not part of the Arts Council, and we absolutely support the need for individuals and freelancers to get the support that has been so sadly missing throughout all of these funds. I understand that there is a new fund through the government on freelance and small businesses and sole traders. But unfortunately, throughout this dispensing of money from the Arts Council, and much to our frustration as well, the very people who create the art and present it and do a lot of the behind the scenes work on an individual basis have been sadly missed out. And it's not, believe you me, for the want of people like myself, Caroline, many of our colleagues making a very loud noise about it. So we do appreciate how difficult it's been.
Yeah. And I think the thing to say is, it's all right, that's Mr. Heath deciding he's had enough of the presentation. There are some funds available from Arts Council for freelancers and for sole traders to go forward for if you've got artistic ideas that you want to put in, but in no way will it meet the gap that you've had for the number of months. The other thing to bear in mind is that the national project grants through Arts Council are taking, at the moment, instead of taking 15 weeks, they've just announced they're taking 16 weeks. It'll probably go to 20 weeks before they make a decision. And for most people who haven't had an income, that's a really long time. The only thing we can suggest, and I'm working with a lot of clients who work within the cultural sector, and I am saying to them, when you're putting your plans together, when you're thinking about how you recover, think about two sets of people. One is those independents, those freelancers. How can you bring them into your activity and your work and find monies to help support them? So we do have an independent sector of artists, of creators, of practitioners, of wonderful people who do wonderful things. And the other thing is, how can you help your suppliers within the supply chain? Are there things that you could be doing, trying to think about where you're getting the funding from to put into use some of the skills that exist within the sector? You know, it is a hugely profitable sector for the UK. It was a hugely profitable sector, and we're hoping it will get back to that. We've not made the decisions about the grant streams, and it would have been, somebody put in the chat about the idea about becoming national portfolio artists. You know, that for me is a great idea that Arts Council now needs to think about, supporting independent artists to actually become part of the cultural ecology and being given a little bit of an income to help survive. Final question for me, somebody's come in again and said, when do we think the continuity support is going to come out? We've no idea. All this guidance at the moment says later in the summer. We're expecting that they want to get this out, get this bedded in, get this actually started and underway, and then they're going to announce it. So we anticipate it could be the end of July. It may even be early August, but it will be, it's coming down the line. So prepare yourself. If question somebody asked earlier was, which should we go for, this one or the continuity? If you are at the end of the road, and this really is, you can demonstrate all of the financial criteria that they're asking for, then go forward for this. If you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, I'm not too sure that we can do this, we might be able to put together a cash flow that shows we're going to go under, don't waste your time on putting in for this one. Actually apply for one, the continuity fund, where you may get funding, where you may stand a chance. We can't advise on which one's going to you're going to be successful on, but there is more money available via the other fund, the continuity fund. So your chances of getting a grant are increased. With relation to what amount to put in for, somebody asked me, and one of the things we're saying is don't put in nice to haves. Only put in the very bare essentials. I was talking to somebody earlier and they said, should we kind of slide under the radar? Should we try and slide under the radar by going in? It might be better in this instance to think, actually, it would be better to come away with something than put in a huge application. They just don't have the money to meet all those huge applications. Consider it like that.
Okay. Oh, I think there's something else that's come in here. Okay.
I think it's further on the freelancers.
Yeah. You know, for me, freelancers are the bit that help make the sector as much as the supplier organisation, as much as those cultural organisations. I'm going to finish by saying, as I said the other day, I'm off to see a high wire act at one of my local venues. It's a historic house and art gallery, and they are using freelancers where they can and bringing forward a programme. And every time I go, I talk to people about the inequity in this system that there has been around how this money has been given out. Some cultural gems are going to survive, but so many of our organisations, both not-for-profit and for-profit, that have been critical to keeping this sector going, that make this brand of culture so invigorating and so important. Some of you are going to go, and I really am so sorry about that, but we will try as far as we can to help some of those that come forward to us to see whether we can help you open that key to getting some money.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And what we can say is that if anything changes between now and the beginning of September, which is when the PLASA London show is on at Olympia, then I'm sure we'll be asking Caroline and Vanessa to either do something remotely into the show or actually come to the show and deliver some kind of update, a Q&A or something whereby we can continue to try and offer as much support as we can.
Yeah.
So I think that's about it. Anything else? Just try. Anything else? I think that's about it. So all it requires from me to do is to say thank you very much indeed for attending. We hope that this has benefited you and given you some confidence or some guidance as to what you need to do to stand the best chance of getting a grant. Also, thanks to Caroline and Vanessa for again delivering such brilliant work. Thank you very much indeed, ladies. And thanks to Freya for organising it all on behalf of PLASA. And we can't see you, but we hope to see you at the PLASA show in London on the 5th, 6th and 7th of September. So until then, thank you very much indeed. If you do have any further questions that you might want answering, please do send them into PLASA and we'll put them out to Caroline and Vanessa and hopefully they'll be able to answer. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine. It's not going to last for too long, so you might as well get out there and enjoy what you can. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.